Programs are cut and what are spared. For more on U.S. policy, we are joined now by Congressman Bill Owens. He's a Democrat from New York. And in studio with me is Dottie Herman. She is the president and CEO of Prudential Douglas Elliman. Representative Owens, is this enough? I understand that you have actually given $230,000 of your 2010 congressional office budget to the Treasury to help pay down the deficit. That's very kind of you, sir. That's clearly not enough. But are these spending cuts enough either?
Well, let me say that, we gave back about 15% of our budget. And I think that if we're moving in the direction of reducing spending by $33 billion, I think that that's a good move in the right direction. It's not going to be something which cripples the economy, and it will keep the government open. More importantly, from my perspective, it evidences people's ability to reach consensus and compromise. And I think that that's what the American people are really looking for us to do, if you will, act like adults and get done.
I have to ask you a question. What about Freddie and Fannie? Because with the housing crisis, I really think that it's not as much a housing crisis as it is a financing. And until we can get credit back, and the whole thing with Freddie and Fannie, I tend to think can make it worse, we're not going to correct the housing market. So what's your stand on that? What are you thinking?
Well, I think that we clearly have to move to, if you will, clean up those two entities. I agree with you to some extent that this is a credit-driven issue, but I also think we had people pushing the housing prices up largely through a series of transactions that maybe lacked economic substance. And when you have something like that, you create the housing bubble, you then create a financial crisis. It's going to take some time both for the economy to recover, for credit to recover, but most importantly for people to get back to work. Clearly, what we need in this recovery is to get back to job creation, and to date, that's still lagging.
But if I might say, I think the housing market, and again, I clearly agree with you that you shouldn't give somebody a mortgage when they don't even have a job, and that was happening. But now you're really looking at taking away the ability to buy a home from people who don't have 20% down but do have good jobs. You're looking at really limiting the amount of financing people can get. And I'm not talking about the cases of people who should have never had mortgages to begin with. And I am a firm believer that you can't fix the housing market until you fix the whole credit market. And I think it's still very, very tight. So I think that,
well, I at least
am working hard. I'm working hard to help. Again, sometimes things go too far to the left and then they go too far to the right. And it's got to kind of be somewhere in the middle. But the American dream of people in home ownership is still very much apparent. And so that's really one of my big concerns that I'm pushing to help really be able to open the credit markets, and again, not give people who can't afford to buy something the ability, but for hardworking people who just might have not saved that down payment, to be able to help them be able to afford their dream. Thank you.
Well, I think that we have a couple of issues there. When you're talking about credit, we need to strike a balance between having sufficient credit in the marketplace, but also making sure that the financial institutions that are lending the funds have adequate reserves. I think that the proposals coming out of the Fed now, where they're looking at, I think, trying to balance the idea between 20% down versus lower amounts down, but the banks retaining some of that mortgage exposure. I think that's something we need to work towards. Many of the community banks, savings and loans in our communities did just that. They retained most of their mortgages on their books, and I think that was one of the reasons, because they had continued exposure to the risk, that they managed those better than some of the larger institutions. So we need to come to some kind of a balance there that allows credit to flow back into the markets, but we also have to make sure that the institutions are managing that risk.
Mr. Owens, it's Stephen King here from London. I wanted to ask you a quick question about this $33 billion, the biggest on record, but still tiny relative to the overall size of US government debt, which is fast approaching 100% of GDP. GDP is about $15 trillion or thereabouts. So to what extent can you really be sure that these kinds of cuts will make any difference to the long-term increase in government debt as a share of GDP? And how do you reassure your overseas creditors that you're on track to control the budget over the medium term?
Well, I think that from my perspective, if we can get down into this 33 billion range, I was fully supportive of going to something in the range of 60 to 70 billion dollars in cuts, because really that represents somewhere in the 2% range. Most people that I talked to, my constituents, felt that they could handle a 2% cut. What they couldn't handle was the approach of simply deleting programs and slashing them out of the budget. I think this represents a compromise, and I think that what people primarily are looking for at this stage is evidence that, in fact, the members of Congress can get together with the White House and reach a compromise. It sets the government on track to move in the right direction. Clearly, in the FY12 budget, we're going to have to continue this process in order for it to be, if you will, believable, and to assure those credit markets that we are, in fact, moving in the right direction.
All right, Representative Bill Owens, a Democratic representative from New York. We appreciate your time this morning, sir. Dottie Herman, President and CEO of Prudential. Douglas Elliman, this is like a business roundtable of sorts, although this table is not round necessarily, but we love the conversation, Ross, of course, between Wall Street and Washington.
Yeah, those conversations will continue. We've seen the Libyan Foreign Minister, of course, has basically decided to defect to the UK. The British Foreign Secretary, William Hague, is saying that he is not being offered any immunity from prosecution. This is Musa Kusa. He's encouraging those around Gaddafi to also abandon him. He's making those comments at the moment. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll look ahead to the US trading day in a few moments.
The report finds that there was no significant progress on civil and political rights in China.